Okay, so look, I messed up, I know I did. And maybe if I'd realized it sooner, I wouldn't be sitting here, suitcase by my side, staring at my phone like it holds all the answers. But I didn't, and now I'm here. It happened at our place, or I guess his place now. A few people were over, nothing big, just a casual night. Daniel, Jordan, some others. I wasn't even thinking about what I was saying, which is what makes it worse. It wasn't some grand, premeditated moment. It was just something that slipped out. Jordan had done something, fixed the cabinet door that had been hanging off its hinge for weeks, I think. He wasn't showing off, just saw it was broken and grabbed a screwdriver. And maybe that shouldn't have been a big deal, but I remember watching him do it, thinking, see, that's what I mean, that's what I want. It wasn't that Daniel was incapable of fixing things, he just didn't. And maybe I was already irritated with him that night. Maybe I was looking for something, anything to poke at. So when Jordan finished and someone made some offhanded comment about how handy he was, I laughed and I said it. See, Jordan is a real man. It wasn't like the room went silent. Nobody gasped or dropped their drinks, it was just another comment in a sea of conversation. I wasn't thinking about what I had just done, but Daniel had heard me, and that was enough. He didn't say anything right away. That was the first sign. Daniel wasn't the type to make a scene, but when he was upset, he had this way of shutting down, of pulling back like he was suddenly in a different place. I caught the way his hand tightened around his glass, the way his jaw shifted ever so slightly, but I ignored it. Maybe I even liked it in some petty, mean part of myself. I had gotten a reaction. The night went on. We drank, we talked, we laughed, but something had changed. I could feel it, even if I didn't want to admit it. Daniel wasn't touching me, wasn't looking at me, and yet I still told myself it was fine. It was. We got home late, the car ride was quiet but not in a comfortable way. Daniel drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead, while I scrolled mindlessly through my phone, pretending not to feel the weight of his silence. I told myself he'd let it go. He wasn't the type to hold on to things. We'd argue sometimes, sure, but it never lasted long. This would blow over. It was just a stupid comment. We walked inside and I kicked off my shoes, already halfway to the bedroom when I heard his voice behind me. What did you mean by that? I paused but didn't turn around. My fingers tightened around my phone. Mean by what? You know what? There was something about his tone, flat, even but too careful, like he had already decided what I was going to say before I said it. I sighed and turned to face him. Oh, come on, you're not seriously mad about that. Daniel didn't move. He just stood there in the dim light of our living room, staring at me like I was a stranger. I just want to know, what did you mean? I rolled my eyes. It was a joke. Was it? His voice was calm, but there was something else underneath it, something I didn't like. I wanted him to fight, to argue, to give me something to push back against, but he was just standing there waiting. I crossed my arms. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I don't think I am. Jesus, Daniel, I let out a sharp laugh. It wasn't about you. Then who was it about? His eyes didn't leave mine, and that was when I felt it, that tiny sliver of doubt, of unease creeping in. The way he was looking at me, it wasn't just anger, it was something deeper. I swallowed. I don't know, it was just, I waved my hand, trying to brush it off. Jordan did something, I said something, you're blowing this out of proportion. Daniel's jaw tensed. He looked down, shaking his head slightly like he was trying to make sense of something that didn't add up. Do you even hear yourself? I exhaled sharply, feeling the frustration build. What do you want me to say, that I think Jordan is some perfect man, that I'm secretly in love with him? I threw my hands up. Is that what you want? Daniel's expression didn't change. I want the truth. That is the truth. He was quiet for a long moment. I thought maybe he was done. Maybe he'd just drop it and we'd both go to bed pissed off, wake up, and move on like we always did. But then he said, I don't think you respect me. I blinked. My mouth opened, but no words came out. The worst part was I didn't immediately deny it. The air between us felt heavier than it should have. I should have laughed, told him he was being ridiculous, told him of course I respected him. But I didn't. I just stood there staring at him, my mouth half open, because something about the way he said it made me hesitate. Daniel waited. He was still too calm. That was what was throwing me off. If he had yelled, if he had got angry, I would have had something to fight against. But instead, he was just standing there, watching me, waiting for me to say something. So I did what I always did when I felt cornered. I got defensive. You're putting words in my mouth, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. That's not what I meant. He nodded slowly, like he had expected me to say that, like he had already run through this conversation in his head before I even had the chance to speak. Okay, he said, then tell me, what did you mean? I groaned, throwing my hands in the air. I don't know, Daniel, it was just a stupid comment. Why are you making this a whole thing? His jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw something flicker in his expression. Hurt, anger, something raw. Because it is a whole thing, Sam. My stomach twisted. His voice didn't rise, but the words hit harder than if he had screamed them. You don't respect me, he said again. You haven't for a long time, and I think I just realized that tonight. I scoffed, even though something deep inside me felt unsteady. Oh, come on. Now you're acting like I've been secretly plotting against you or something. Daniel shook his head. No, I think it's worse than that. That made me stop. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He exhaled, running a hand down his face. It means I don't think you even realize it. I think you've been chipping away at me for so long, so slowly that you don't even notice anymore. I opened my mouth, then shut it. My throat felt tight. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking away for a second before meeting my eyes again. Do you even like me? I let out a dry laugh, but it sounded wrong even to me. Oh, don't be dramatic. He didn't move. I'm serious. And suddenly I was too, because I didn't know how to answer. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say of course I did. But for some reason, the words weren't coming. Daniel watched me struggle with it, and then something shifted in his expression. Something quiet. That was the moment I knew I had lost something I wasn't even sure I wanted to keep. Daniel nodded to himself like that was all the answer he needed. And then he turned, walked to the bedroom, and started pulling out my suitcase. I stood there, frozen, watching as he moved through the room with quiet efficiency. He wasn't throwing things, wasn't slamming drawers, just packing. Like it was the most logical next step, like it was already decided. Daniel, I said, my voice catching slightly. He didn't stop. He grabbed my clothes from the dresser, folded them not neatly but not carelessly either, and placed them into the suitcase. I forced out a laugh, but it sounded brittle. You're actually packing my bags right now? He didn't answer. That should have been my first real warning. I took a step closer, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. Oh, come on. You're really doing this over a comment? Daniel paused for just a second, gripping the edge of the dresser like he was steadying himself. Then he turned to face me, his expression unreadable. It wasn't just a comment. His voice was quiet, tired, and you know that. I swallowed hard. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was overreacting, that this was ridiculous, that no sane person would throw away a marriage over something so stupid. But the words wouldn't come. Because suddenly I wasn't sure if that was true. I watched as he grabbed my toiletries from the bathroom, as he reached for my shoes, as he methodically zipped up the suitcase and set it beside the door. That was when the panic started to creep in. I had expected a fight. Yelling, accusations, something dramatic and messy that would end with one of us storming off only to come back hours later, exhausted but still together. This wasn't that. This was quiet, deliberate, final. Daniel, I tried again, my voice softer this time. Can we stop for a second and talk about this? He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Talk about what? He gestured at the suitcase. You already said everything you needed to. That's not fair, I said quickly, stepping closer. I didn't mean it like that. His eyes met mine, sharp but not angry. Then how did you mean it? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Had I meant to hurt him? No. Had I meant something? Probably. But how could I explain that when I didn't even fully understand it myself? Daniel watched my silence stretch out, and something in his face hardened. He reached for the suitcase handle and rolled it toward me. No, I blurted out, stepping in front of it. No, I'm not doing this. His jaw tight. Sam, I shook my head. You're being dramatic. I'm setting a boundary. I let out a sharp breath. Daniel, I live here. He exhaled slowly, like he had already thought about this, already made peace with it. Then tell me you want to stay. He waited. I clenched my fists. I want to stay. His eyes searched mine. Because you love me, I swallowed. Because this is our home. He nodded once, like that confirmed something for him. Then he stepped back, clearing the space between me and the door. That was when I realized he wasn't throwing me out. He was giving me a choice. I could stay, but only if I could say the one thing that should have been easy to say. And the fact that I could, that was the problem. I stared at him, my pulse hammering. My hands itched to grab the suitcase and fling it across the room, to do something to shatter this awful, suffocating quiet. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for the suitcase handle. Daniel's face didn't change. He just nodded once, and I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not free, not relieved, just untethered. Like something had been holding me in place, and now that it was gone, I wasn't sure if I was floating or falling. I stood there on the porch, gripping the handle of my suitcase so tightly my knuckles ached. The night was quiet, cold. I could still feel the warmth of the house behind me, the place I had lived, the place I had shared with him. But I wasn't inside anymore. I waited. Maybe I expected him to come after me. Maybe I thought he'd yank the door back open and say, fine, I made my point, now get back inside. But he didn't, and that scared me more than anything. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly. I could call someone, a friend, a hotel. Jordan, no, I clenched my jaw. I wasn't going to call Jordan. This had nothing to do with him. This had never been about him. My feet felt frozen in place. It didn't feel real yet. Not completely. Any second now I would wake up, Daniel would be beside me in bed, and this would all be some strange, awful dream. But the cold seeping through my jacket was real. The weight of my suitcase was real. The emptiness in my chest, that was real too. I had thought I would feel angry. Thought I'd be replaying the conversation, picking apart every word, crafting the perfect comeback I should have said. But instead, all I felt was this strange, creeping numbness. And underneath that, something worse. Regret. I dragged in a breath, but it didn't feel like it reached my lungs. Had I really just walked out, I could have stopped it. I knew I could have. If I had just said the right thing, if I had swallowed my pride, if I had reached for him instead of my suitcase, would I still be inside? Would we still be us? My thumb hovered over Daniel's name on my phone. I could go back inside, knock on the door, say that I was sorry, that I had made a mistake, but had I? Or had I just finally said something out loud that had been sitting between us for months? Years. My pulse pounded in my ears. I could still feel the way he had looked at me, the quiet disappointment, the realization that he didn't need to fight me on this, because he already knew the truth. And now so did I. I let my hand drop to my side. The street was empty. The world kept turning, completely unaware that my life had just split into before and after. I took a step forward, then another. And I kept walking. The wheels of my suitcase rattled against the pavement, a hollow sound in the quiet night. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I kept moving. Not because I had anywhere to go, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling. The streetlight stretched my shadow long across the sidewalk, casting me in pieces. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself, but it wasn't enough. The cold wasn't just on my skin. It was inside me now, burrowing deep, settling in places I hadn't known could feel empty. I reached the corner and stopped. The street was silent. No cars, no footsteps, just me. I could turn back. The thought came and went in an instant, a flicker of something desperate before pride smothered it. If I went back now, what would I even say? That I hadn't meant it, that I was sorry, that I was. I let out a sharp breath, tilting my head back, staring up at the sky like it might give me an answer. It didn't. The stars didn't care. The moon didn't care. The world kept spinning, indifferent to the fact that I was standing here untethered, unmoored, with no direction except away. I pulled out my phone again, my fingers cold and stiff as they hovered over Daniel's name. One call. That was all it would take. Maybe he was sitting in the living room right now, staring at the door, waiting. Maybe he wanted me to call just as much as I wanted to. Or maybe he was. Maybe he had locked the door, turned off the lights, and gone to bed without a second thought. That hurt more than I expected it to. I swallowed, tightening my grip on the phone, on the suitcase, on anything that still felt solid. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had been so sure of the rules, how we fought, how we made up, how the cycle always spun back around to normal. But this time something had cracked, and now I didn't know if it could be put back together, or if I even knew how to try. The wind picked up, stinging my skin. I should go somewhere. Find a hotel, call a friend, do something. Instead, I just stood there. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure what I wanted, and that scared me more than losing him ever could. I sat on the curb, suitcase beside me, phone still in my hand. The cold seeped through my jeans, but I barely felt it. My body was here, but my mind was back in that living room, back in that moment when Daniel had looked at me, really looked at me, and decided to let go. I never thought he would. That was the worst part, wasn't it? The thing scraping against the inside of my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I had pushed and pushed and pushed, knowing he would always pull me back. That was how we worked. That was what we did, until it was. I blinked down at my phone, the screen lighting up my hands, his name glowing like a lifeline I wasn't sure I could reach for. If I called, would he answer? Would he let it ring? Would he see my name and feel that same dull ache in his chest that I felt in mine, or had he already decided that this was it? I should have said something before I walked out, should have fought harder, should have wanted to fight. But I didn't, not enough. The weight of that realization pressed down on me, settling in my stomach like a stone. I exhaled shakily, shoving my phone back into my pocket before I could do something I'd regret. Regret. The word was foreign on my tongue, but I felt it now, creeping in, curling around my thoughts. Not just regret for tonight. Regret for every small, careless thing I'd said in the past. Every sigh, every dismissive wave of my hand, every moment I had taken for granted that he would stay. Had I ever told him how much I appreciated him? Had I ever shown him? Or had I just assumed he knew, the same way I had assumed he would never reach for my suitcase instead of my hand? A car passed, headlights washing over me, and I realized how late it had gotten. The street was quiet, the world moving on while I sat here, stuck between what was and what came next. I should get up, find somewhere to go, do something. But I stayed where I was, fingers curled into my sleeves, staring at the road ahead, knowing I had walked myself into this moment, and not knowing if I had the strength to walk back. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time felt like something separate from me now, distant and unimportant. I was just here, sitting on this curb, suitcase at my side like a quiet companion while the night stretched on without me. I had nowhere to go, not really. I could call someone, one of the friends I still had, the ones who hadn't drifted away while I was too busy being caught up in my own world. But what would I say? Hey, can I crash at your place? Yet Daniel kicked me out. No, it's not what you think, or maybe it is, I don't even know anymore. No, I couldn't do that, I could get a hotel. But something about checking into a room alone, handing over my card for a place that wasn't home, felt like an admission I wasn't ready to make. I could go back, the thought slithered in before I could stop it. I could walk back to the house, knock on the door, tell him that I was sorry, that I hadn't meant it, that I didn't know why I had said it in the first place. Would that be enough, or would he look at me the way he had before, quiet and steady, waiting for me to say something that actually meant something? And would I still be unable to do it? I closed my eyes. The truth sat heavy in my chest. I hadn't just said something thoughtless tonight. I had confirmed something he already suspected. That deep down I didn't respect him the way I should have. That something had been missing for a long time, and instead of trying to fix it, I had let it fester, waiting for him to be the one to change. I had spent so much time focusing on what Daniel wasn't that I had never stopped to appreciate what he was. And now I didn't know if I would get the chance. I exhaled slowly, my breath visible in the cold air. There was no easy fix. No simple way to undo the weight of everything that had led to this moment. But sitting here doing nothing wouldn't change anything either. I reached for my phone again. Not Daniel, not yet, but someone, anyone, because if I stayed here any longer, I was afraid I'd disappear into the quiet, swallowed whole by the choices I had made. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I could live with that. I ended up in a coffee shop. It wasn't planned. My feet had just started moving, and before I knew it, I was pushing open the door, the warmth hitting me like a wall. The smell of burnt espresso and vanilla, the low hum of conversation, it should have felt normal. It didn't. I ordered something I wasn't even sure I wanted and found a seat by the window. The barista barely looked at me, just slid the cup across the counter, indifferent to the fact that I was untethered, floating in the aftermath of my own mistakes. I stared out at the empty street, the lights from passing cars smearing across the glass. My phone sat on the table next to me, screen dark. I had made exactly one call to a hotel, booked a room without really thinking, just something to tell myself I had a plan. I didn't. The drink in front of me was getting cold, untouched. I wrapped my hands around it anyway, as if that could stop the way they were shaking. Daniel hadn't called. I hadn't expected him to. Not really. But some small, foolish part of me had still hoped. I knew him. I knew his routines. Knew that right now he was probably sitting on the couch staring at the TV without watching it. Maybe he'd fallen asleep there. Maybe he'd gone to bed, stretched out on his side, leaving my side cold and empty. Maybe he was relieved. The thought made my stomach twist. I had always been so sure that Daniel needed me, that I was the one who kept things together, that without me he would just drift. But now, sitting here alone, I wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe I had been the one leaning on him without even realizing it. I reached for my phone before I could talk myself out of it, unlocked it, scrolled through my messages until I found his name. There were no missed calls, no unread messages. I hovered over the keyboard, my heart hammering. I could say anything. Where are you? Can we talk? I didn't mean it, but I didn't type any of those things. Instead, my fingers moved on their own, writing something I hadn't even realized I was thinking until I saw the words staring back at me. Do you think we made a mistake? I stared at it. Read it again. Then, before I could change my mind, I hit send. The message delivered immediately. No typing bubble, no response. I set the phone down, exhaling shakily. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, my coffee had gone completely cold, and I waited. The message sat there, glowing on the screen, a question I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. I watched the phone like it might do something, like the moment would crack open and give me some kind of sign, some relief from the silence pressing in on me. But the typing bubble never appeared. No dots flickering, no proof that he was even thinking about responding. I swallowed, my throat dry. I should go to the hotel, get some sleep, pretend I wasn't waiting. Pretend I wasn't checking the screen every 10 seconds. Instead, I just sat there, fingers curling into my sleeves, staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I looked different somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing myself clearly for the first time in a long time. I had been waiting for him to fix things, to reach for me, to pull me back, and he hadn't. Because this time he wasn't supposed to. I closed my eyes. I had spent so long convincing myself that I had been the one holding him together, that I hadn't noticed the ways he had been holding me. And now, without him, I felt it, the absence, the weight of everything he had carried that I had never even bothered to see. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe we had made a mistake. But not tonight, not just now in this moment, a long time ago, when we stopped choosing each other, when we let the resentment seep in. When I let my expectations become impossible and he let his silence stretch too long. Maybe this ending wasn't about one comment at a party. Maybe it had been coming for years. The phone vibrated, sharp and sudden against the tabletop. My breath caught as I snatched it up, pulse thrumming in my ears. Daniel's name. One message, I don't know, that was it. No apology, no anger, just those 3 words holding more weight than anything else he could have said. I stared at the screen, read it again. I should respond, I didn't. Instead, I turned the phone over, pressing my fingers against the cool surface, grounding myself in the quiet. The answer wasn't coming tonight. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not ever. But for the first time, I wasn't looking to him to give it to me. I let out a breath, slow and steady, and picked up my suitcase. Then, without checking the phone again, I walked out into the night.